Well, hello and welcome. Thank you for coming this afternoon to the Catherine G. Murphy Gallery. My name is Nicole Watson, and I am the gallery director. We have the great pleasure today of having two of our artists here to talk this afternoon about the current show that's up on the wall. The name of the show is Dissonance and Repair, and this is Barbara Kreft and Kimberly Benson. So the format, I'm going to tell you just a little bit about the format before I introduce the artists. The format today is each of them will talk about 15 to 20 minutes about their work and their process and kind of their creative paths. And then there will be time for audience questions. So if you have questions kind of in the middle, if you just maybe jot them down or tuck them away for a few minutes and we'll let you know when we can go ahead and open it up for discussion. So let me tell you a little bit about each of them. Kimberly Benson is a Minneapolis artist and an adjunct professor in the Foundations Department at the Minneapolis College of Art and Design. She received her MFA in painting from the University of Wisconsin-Madison and a BFA from the College of Visual Arts in St. Paul. Her paintings have been exhibited widely in both solo and group shows across the Midwest, including exhibitions at, is it MANA? Is it called MANA Contemporary in Chicago? Okay, in Chicago, and the Museum of Wisconsin Art in West Bend, Wisconsin, and the Plains Art Museum in Fargo. She has some great upcoming events, actually. A solo show in June at the McRosty Center for the Arts in Grand Rapids, an artist residency in August at the McCanna House through the North Dakota Museum of Art in Grand Forks, and she'll also have she'll be the featured artist at Hair and Nails Gallery in Minneapolis this fall. Is that right? Yeah. Okay. Barbara Kreft is a native of northern Germany. She studied painting in Berlin, and after receiving her MFA, she moved to the U.S. and eventually settled in Minneapolis, where she now maintains a rigorous painting practice. She began her artistic life with Warm Gallery, which was in its beginning stages in the mid-1970s. Throughout her long career, she has been represented by various Minneapolis galleries and has exhibited her work nationally and in Germany. She has also held teaching appointments at local institutions, including the College of Visual Arts and Macalester College. A recipient of several State Arts Board grants and McKnight Fellowships, her large-scale abstract paintings are included in numerous private and corporate collections, and she is currently represented by Circa Gallery in Minneapolis. So join me in welcoming Barbara Kreft and Kimberly Benson. Who's going first? Barbara's going first? Okay.
I have the privilege of being older, so I get to go first. Is this working?
It is working.
Okay.
It's mostly just...
All right. So
you guys can hear, everyone can hear.
yeah. So first of all, I'd like to say that Kim and I are very happy to have this opportunity to show here. And we're very pleased with the exhibition and the intimacy of it and the idea of just having sheer painting to look at. Kim and I have known each other now for 10 years. She was a student of mine at the College of Art and Design, and then after graduate school, there happened to be space in my building where I live and work, which is the Purity Bakery building, an old bakery. So Kim moved there too, and we are now very close. We work and live next to each other, and we have a really strong painting relationship or rapport. And the interesting part is that Kim is beginning at the beginning stage, and I'm sort of towards the end of it all. So we come from different perspectives and bring different things to it. Like I have survived for a long time. I've always put painting first. I've never had a full-time position. I never wanted to have that. I've put up with whatever I had to put up with just in order to have time to work. And so I have that, experience of long time painting, surviving. And Kim has the experience of going through graduate school and being in the 21st century, like bringing a lot of other things to painting. So it's a very fruitful relationship that we have and very respectful. It doesn't mean that we talk every day at all. We email every day, however, even though we're right next door. But I completely trust Kim's input. So if I need some feedback, I ask her and vice versa. So it's really quite special. And I think, I can only speak for myself. Kim has influenced me. I don't mean consciously, it's not that I go there and think, oh, I should try this or that. But I think the energy flow is such that it just kind of impacts. So now I should talk about my work. It was interesting to me reading the students' statements. We read them all, and a lot of them, they all mentioned emotion and relating to the environment or relating to the work. And I think that is the premise of art, that you have a very strong reaction to the world that you live in, and you pick your battles to fight, or you pick something that moves you the most or that is most urgent. I think that's really how it works. And it doesn't necessarily change throughout one's career. It hasn't changed for me. I grew up in the country, and my parents went through World War II, so I had an early sense of futility about human ambition and all these ideas, and it was very sort of devastating, and I turned my attention to nature. I also grew up in a natural environment, and my dad was pretty much a botanist, even though that wasn't his main job. So I think I put my attention to be a voice for everything that doesn't have a voice, And I remember early paintings of tortured monkeys. I was an animal rights advocate that I couldn't even handle looking at. So I dropped all of that and I turned to beauty, like painting something so beautiful that it hurts, or presenting things that are really perishing or that are threatened. I think that's my main concern right now. I'd like to spend the last part of my life seeing as much of the natural world as possible. So both of us use photography. I don't like to make things up anymore because I think your own vocabulary is always limited. At some point you end up repeating yourself or relying on the same sort of, brushwork or color. So it needs constant challenging. And when I walk around, wherever I walk around, I take photos of things that really strike me. And I notice that what strikes me are things that are abandoned. I have a whole folder on mattresses that are left in the alley, and it seems that there's one a day. It's amazing. So things that are left, that are decrepit, or sometimes a whole burnt down garage with, you wouldn't believe how much stuff is in there. But you can see paintings everywhere, which is so phenomenal. Wherever you go, there's a painting, There's a relationship between shapes and negative space, positive space, and color and whatnot. And that's also how I often get color. I go around and I see, very unusual, not fitting color. Like when they mark a sidewalk with fluorescent pink, but the rest of it is really dirty, the sidewalk, and there's trash. So I take photos, and that has changed over the years. For a while I was taking, I put them in these folders. These are reflections of leaves on sidewalk or any kind of ground that I thought was kind of intriguing. And then I had a whole one on water. This is the one on the mattresses. That's just a section. And right now I'm strictly working with images from nature, and I like to just talk about these paintings. So the middle one came first, and for that one, the idea, what was clear in my mind was that I wanted a diagonal movement, and I wanted some space around, which was really new for me. I used to fill my canvases to the edge because I didn't want a figure-ground relationship. I wanted something that was sort of endless. They're referring to the ongoing repetitions of the universe, or where you couldn't yourself find just one particular place. So you would always be wandering and roaming. So that was a challenge for me to leave empty space. And the painting is based on coral. I mean, you wouldn't, not that that's important to me, but as I said, I need some kind of formal vocabulary that is outside of myself. So I went to Hawaii, and I had an underwater camera. The coral, of course, everywhere is dying, so there were people in the water all day long protecting it and yelling at tourists who did the wrong thing. So anyway, the coral images are sort of bleached, or, they're not that attractive, but the shapes to me were very intriguing, kind of Baroque and curly, and I also, of course, I photographed fish too, but I didn't put those in. And the other thing that's in there are these spiky, those sea urchins. So I limited myself to these curvy shapes, the angular, the exploding shapes, and then I got a book on tropical fish, Pacific Ocean fish, and I used some of the patterns very loosely to put in there. So both Kim and I start out making a complete mess, maybe on purpose. Like I take the dirty paint cleaning water where I clean my brushes, and I just pour it on there, on my canvas, on the floor. Sometimes I have, in that case, I maybe do a diagonal something. And the color is usually like dirty brownish, but transparent and dries quickly because it's, paint thinner. And then I will lay out main shapes. I was clear on the color palette on that one. And then you have to make it, or I have to make it all work. And that's the challenge. So I feel when I paint that I go in there every day and I'm solving math problems, and that was a subject that I always failed. It was like really hard. So I find that the mental work of doing painting is really, really difficult to make it all work, and you can't even put into word what makes it work, I mean, you have to, I'm very self-critical, and I work on these things forever because, I have it down and I think, oh, this is done. And then the next day I think, no, it's not done. There's more, this isn't right or that isn't right. And then the problem of the background, how to handle that. It can't be too flat, it has to have some gesture, but the gesture can't compete with the flatness. So those are problems I deal with, I think, with every painting. And in my work, there's constantly a dialogue between the man-made and the natural. So the man-made would be the hard edge, the very flat, and the natural is the more organic, the rougher edges or the unfinished. Both Kim and I work very labor intensive. And that's something that we really believe in spending a lot of time. And that's where the repairing comes in, where you take something and you sort of make it work. You put a lot of loving attention on this particular area, and that's sort of a repairing or giving it credence and importance. So that's where that comes in. And then the most difficult painting was this one. That's my latest one. Because, I was very intrigued. I walk my dog by the creek every day, and I don't even know if you can recognize this. So there were fallen branches of cottonwood that had already somewhat decomposed. But they were in themselves so strange and so beautiful. There was a kind of a structure, cross-like structure of branches, and then these things hanging that looked like mummies or something really ancient, wrapped and cocoon-like. And so I took photos, and then I lost my camera. I lost 5 cameras already. Like I dropped them in the creek. It was like unbelievable. So anyway, I didn't even have more images, and I started with this thing. Anyway, I had a structure. I put down all these shapes that you see are those cottonwood things, I didn't have a painting palette in mind, and this went through so many metamorphoses, I can't tell you. And, it ended up getting fuller and fuller, and I could not leave an empty space, and yeah, it was like a real workout, I have to say. And I didn't finish it too long ago, and let's see. I think I'm exploring more gestural and flatness and using palette knives. That's the other thing. This is what's intriguing me. So Kim, you'd think that Kim is a really messy painter, right? She is so organized. Her table, everything is clean. And then I make such a mess. I don't even know how I mix some of these colors. It's like all over the place. So it's intriguing to me because I work so like anal, Yeah. You would think that. That's always interesting to me how different we work. So I consider myself a 20th or 19th century painter in the sense that I adhere to very simple basic materials like brushes, oil paint. I use walnut oil because I'm so allergic at this point to, I can't even handle the stuff that she uses. I'd be like coughing the whole time. So that's the difference, I'm kind of not an old-fashioned painter, but I'm just using paint, period. And odorless paint thinners because everything else is out of the question. But it's intriguing how Kim is moving this whole painting conversation into another direction. So time is important for both of us, meaning deleting time. Because time, we all have this time hanging over our heads, get this done, produce a lot, and nobody has time. Time is this threat. Time is money and God knows what. So this idea of deleting time or making time irrelevant, right? So this is part of our real deep belief and also concern. I can't remember what I left out. Oh, I'm very interested right now in tree bark. So I have a huge collection of tree bark photos, and I guess I'm always interested in structures. All my work has to do with structure, and earlier work has to do with even more structure and seemingly organized pattern, but not really. I'm always subverting the idea of real pattern or real organization or real meaning. All of that is completely challenged. So the trees also have these structures, but then they wear off. And whatever, I don't use human material, but what I use is subject to the same things that concern us, like time, environmental influences, competition on, where to grow or what, disease that might befall you or, enemies that will eat you, things like that. So in a way, everything that I paint in there or the relationships that happen have to do with the human condition, except that I don't pick a particular area, but it's all about, being having to get along or living, having to cooperate, having to adaptation is a big thing in nature. If there's anything going to be left, nature has to really adapt because of us. So I think I've probably said enough, right? So the last painting, I just want to say, I forgot my notebook. I make collages, and that, you would never guess what that's based on. Those were tiny tiger lily petals that I pressed in my notebook, and sometimes I make card out of it. But I looked at that, and I thought, wow, that's sort of an interesting composition. I wonder if I'd make a painting out of it. So that's very mundane subject matter, but I turned it into something much more wild, and I'm calling it Medusa rosata, which is a jellyfish. So more in my titles are referring to species or something like that. Yeah, you're welcome.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kim, and I agree that I'm delighted to have this show here at St. Kate's, and thank you all for coming. And as far as our relationship goes, I mean, my perspective, I met Barbara as a student at the College of Visual Arts, and she was the most, or at least on the top of the inspiring professors at that school. She changed the course of my life, I would say. And then we've maintained at first a professional relationship that was more of a mentorship, but then she became my dear friend. And this show is about sheer painting, but also about abstraction, because we're both committed to investigating abstraction for reasons of the possibilities more than the specifics. And we both come from different places, but over the years it's strange because, like she said, we don't talk about painting that much, but given that we've been so close for many years, and her work has personally always inspired me. Although I was making very different work in the beginning, we have this kind of symbiotic relationship. We feed each other subliminally, and yet we do talk as well, but it's more an undercurrent. So it's great to have this show here. There's a lot to kind of talk about. As far as my work, this series is all based on ideas from the Dutch Vanitas, still life genre, 17th, 18th century. I would say we're both very influenced by photography and images, but also the history of painting. So we might lose some of you with our language of painting. It is sometimes, exclusive. I love painting, so does Barbara. Love the material, love the kind of complexities, and it seems endless as to what one can come up with, creating an image that is both, flat and also material. I think that's why I love painting, is because I'm a materialist, expressive. But this work is out of my kind of meditation on the Vanitas genre, which my work has always been about death in a way. I used to paint figuratively like 10 years ago, and I was interested in the body and mortality and death from some experiences, and just being sort of morbid. I mean, before I wanted to be an artist, I had thoughts about being working at the morgue and doing forensic science and stuff like that. I've always been fascinated with death. But I would say that before I was more interested in the darkness and making political work, and now I'm more interested in making material, rich, enigmatic kinds of paintings that are much more alive, I guess I would say. And I'm also interested in beauty. So this gives you sort of an example, and it's hard to see probably, but this is a 18th century watercolor painting by Hermann Henstenberg. And it's tiny, it's about 14 inches in real life, and it's like a watercolor, and I've manipulated it. So I use Photoshop or computer filters to change my photography that I find. And then sometimes I like cut up a bunch of photography and paste it together. I love like analog processes of cut, paper, glue, painting. Barbara was saying that she is more of a traditionalist or a 19th, 20th century painter in terms of her process is more traditional. And I did try to be a traditional painter, but I would say in undergrad, the education wasn't that intensive. The foundation didn't start out with painting. We kind of got into, you went from still life painting to abstraction, and it was like, whoa, how do I even deal with this? So now, later on, I'm much more interested in debasing painting and interested in messing it up, adding things to my oil paint, although I love oil paint and I don't want to use acrylic. There's reasons why my paintings are oil paint, and it's because it has its own qualities that are much, in my opinion, richer. Acrylic, I think, is right out of the modern contemporary world. It's plastic. And so I do want my paintings as well to have a sense of timelessness, like we talk about. But so my paintings are, so they come out of ideas of the Vanitas genre because of the metaphorical implications of death and futility of life and cyclical nature. But I love binaries too. I love like chaos and control in a work, or organic versus natural, or structure versus looseness. All of that is part of it, and they're endless. They often go wrong. I mean, I work on many paintings at one time, and they don't work out. They often don't work out. They fail. And it is always a bummer when it happens, but then I just like let them sit, and I will let them dry, and I'll scrape them back, sand them back, press on them, try to mess them up, and then paint back on them. And I think about my process now sort of as like composting. And that's been rich and sort of a light bulb, because in school, which you're on a different time frame, it's like, make this painting in like a week. And you're like, no, that's not possible. So now the freedom of being out of grad school and on my own, I take time to make paintings, and they take tons of layers and tons of work, but yet that's okay. I want to like labor on a painting, you know? It's important. They become much more rich, and I'm interested in that kind of complexity. Also, like sort of a maximist in a way. I don't know how to make a simple painting. It's just, I would like to, in a way, but it's, right now it's not possible, so. I feel like maybe I've said some things that are helpful, and we could take questions. There's, you know, we brought these up here, but it's hard to show you. I mean, this is like a painting of a Vanitas. Like I took a photo of the Vanitas, and then I painted on it. So I like to, you know, obliterate or diffuse or manipulate the imagery, and then I do that within the paintings. And these two on the wall here, and this one are more related to work from the past year, and then the one on the back wall and the one next to it, so the medium to the smaller, and this one over here, they're sort of the new direction I'm going in, where I'm getting more textural. I use lace fabric. That's, I guess, one thing I didn't say. I love to think about image, both actual and implied. So a texture that you can feel, and then also a texture that you can see. So it represents an image, but then it actually is an image. And I've been using lace for like 6-7 years and not really knowing what its importance is. But it's becoming more like a wall, like a fresco painting, and I'm interested in that erosion. So it breaks down in front of you, and yet it builds itself up. And it's all within this painting language, and of course you'll get what you can from it. But sorry if we've lost some of you to our painting language. I mean, I guess that's why you're here, is to hear about painting, but yeah, so maybe we should take questions now.
Some questions. Anyone have any questions? Okay, but wait. Okay. Do you want to do the microphones, Kim?
Hi. Hi. Are you?
Yeah,
Can you there?
yeah.
So I'm curious about the scale of the photographs. So are you printing them standard 11 by 16, 8 by 10, 24 by something or other? Are they, photographic images, or are they what? And then how do you then jump scale-wise? I'm just thinking playing with scale.
For me personally, I just would find imagery online or in books, photograph it myself, like sort of crudely, or take photos of things I see, like Barbara was saying with documenting, like just, looking around. But lots of mine come from the history of art, history of painting, I would say. And then I print them at like CVS or Walgreens, 4 by 6 inches. And I started doing this because collaging, cutting them apart and putting them back together made sense to me for painting, because it's all about color, form, shape, where sketching was not helpful. I needed to see the imagery and for it to be tactile and movable. So I guess like a analog form of Photoshop in a way. But then I just, having them physically, I can paint on them. And for me, translating that into a painting, well, it doesn't really happen like one-to-one. They operate on like a parallel line with my paintings. But I had, taken this photo collage and scanned it. So it was once a photo that was printed, and then I cut it up, glued it, painted on it, debased it, altered it, and then I scan it, and then I print it large, and I've printed banner printers on fabric, and actually, like that painting and that painting are my digital collages stretched over canvas and then painted on. And oftentimes they're like completely painted over, and it's like, why did I even print the collage? But that's part of the process, so for me.
Any other questions?
So you both talk about source material that is that a starting place? Are you considering those things throughout the whole painting process, or does it just become painting?
So for me, maybe halfway through it changes. I start out with that idea, for instance, the tree bark shapes. But once I have my composition down, I think it's a question of shape and composition, and then it's about the painting. Then it's turning it into a painting, that is interesting, that has relationships of form and color and surface and tension or whatever. So at some point, the subject matter is no longer important, in my case, you know.
Yeah, and I would say that there's really not a start. And that's sort of the beauty of being a painter out of school. And like, for us, like, you're just always in your head thinking about your work. You're always painting. And I try to think about the paintings all the time. And the source material is always there as well. But, you know, it's just, there's not really a start. Does that make sense? I don't know. They're all connected. It's all ongoing. Although you do have to think about one painting to resolve it. That's part of my process. It's sort of like an endless investigation of layers, and so when I do start to really hone in and potentially resolve a painting, I do need to just meditate on that painting.
I only work on one at a time. I can't work on several, because each one is also so different, you know, and I try to set up a different color structure for each one. So for my next painting, I have a basic idea of what I want, and I'd like to work more with these tree branches, you know, a mess of these, but looping, so that they're more elliptical shapes. So that's all I have in my head, you know, so then I need to find the material, and I'm thinking of color, you know, what do I want, so it's very specific, and then at some point, you know, I might end up with a completely different color structure than I thought. But I need something to start with that feels sort of safe, like I know what I'm going to do. Because it gets so difficult later. If it was immediately so difficult, then you lose courage, you know. So I need to have a sort of something to.
And that's
sink
the
my
thing
teeth in.
with abstraction. It's not as though we're just going off into nothingness, or it has roots.
Yeah.
It's planted in things that are familiar or representational.
Even, yes.
That are real or things, so then it becomes something else.
Something else. And then
And
with
it's a-
abstraction, there are so many possibilities. I mean, I have to stop myself, you know, where you think, well, what if I painted the flesh color pink, you know, and then if I don't pay attention, I'll just do it. And then you start the painting all over, or you make one little move and it changes everything. So it's endless. It has all these possibilities at all times. So it's good to have some kind of clarity. I don't know I need a starting point like that is pretty almost factual. But then, you know, I let it go.
Carol.
I'm kind of curious about your painting practice and its pace. So,
Pace.
you know, like I'm curious, just it's a kind of a personal question, I suppose. How do you pace yourself in terms of actually painting? Is it a steady pace, or is it a kind of quiet, you know, action-packed? So,
Well, I paint every day. You know, I was taught that you don't wait for inspiration, you just go in there. You know, if you want to be a writer, you have to sit down and write.
Takes work.
If you don't know what to write, you just go in there. You know, I'll be starting on a painting and I have no clue what to do. I don't feel like it. I don't know what colors to use. I don't feel like it at all. You know, and if I gave into that, I would get extremely down, but I just stick with it. And after an hour or so, I have always put painting first. I get up and I look forward to painting. So that's what I'll do. And I don't ever take the phone with me there. I mean, I'm to a point where I don't even answer the phone, period. But I remember when I thought, you know, you don't have to take the phone in there. I don't even listen to music anymore, or very little. You know, it's just sheer, when I work, and I'm completely concentrated. I don't sit down. I sit down once in a while to look at it, you know, and I mean, I remember when I lived in one space working, I would go to bed and look at my paintings from my bed. You know, I'd have them so that I could even look at them, or look at them when I have lunch, or like thinking, or maybe this, maybe that. So I think that's very important, and it's really difficult to establish this kind of a rigor. There's so many distractions, you know, and we talk about being an artist is also kind of a sacrifice. You know, you don't have a life, so to speak. I mean, I'm married to painting. I have a dog.
That's what I say.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's true.
It's true. It's like I don't go out much because it's just all, I used to go out more when I was younger, but now I don't want this much input into my head. The world is already chock full of stuff every day. I mean, I relentlessly listen to the radio, to news, and I need to know what goes on in the world. You know, that's the counterpoint to me being in this world of painting and color and beauty, but at the same time, I want to know exactly what is happening in the world, regardless of how disturbing it is. And I listen every day to all kinds of programs. But I don't have a TV. I don't watch TV. I read at night.
Yeah, I would say that like just painting should be a daily practice, because it's like cold starting if you don't paint for a couple days.
Yeah.
So you're out of your brain. It's like you just feel as though you've made no progress. You don't know what you're doing, because once you start painting or making your work every day, then you grow. And it changes on you. So action-packed, sometimes it is action-packed, and sometimes I can't paint for a while, and it totally pisses me off, but because of other responsibilities, you know? But I would say ideally it's like this ongoing, and there's like ways that I work where I won't be necessarily painting, like putting paint on, but just like the processes and thinking about it. Lots of thinking and prep work and layering, but it needs to sort of be ongoing, and then you have moments of more intensity. And I like deadlines too, though. I do like deadlines for resolving work. Otherwise,
I don't at all.
And see, she's the opposite.
I mean,
Yeah.
that would be my death. Deadlines. No, I'd be freezing up. But I think the more you work, you know, if you keep that studio practice, the more ideas you have.
Yeah, it's so true. Inspiration
I would have
comes.
like 3 lifetimes to do everything that, you know.
Yeah, make the work and it will tell you what it is.
Yeah, and every time you make something, you get ideas for the next work, and then make sure you write them down. You know, I have kept a lot of journals, like writing journals to make little sketches, or you know, write down ideas before they vanish.
Does that answer your question?
Hi, Kim and Barbara. You talked a little bit about a journal, but I'm interested in a visual journal. Do you have a daily practice that you do beyond the works themselves? Like a visual journal or just drawing?
Well, I have pretty much ruined my body, you know, my shoulders, my arms, everything. And I listened to a pianist on the radio a long time, not too long ago, Hélène Grimaud. She's this tiny person who plays very heavy-duty romantic literature. So she was asked, how do you manage all of this? And she said, I practice in my head. And it kind of hit me, because that's what I do. I visualize everything in my head, because I don't have the time or energy to do that. But when I'm on vacation or when I travel or something like that, I've always taken tiny notebooks and watercolors to learn, how to paint a real tree or how to paint my dog or something like that. But on a daily basis, I write and I visualize everything else in my head.
Yeah, I don't keep a regular sketchbook habit because painting is more important. I mean, it's sort of like I do make these
Yeah, those are
all the time in a way, but at times more intensely than others. And yeah, I've never really been a sketcher, so it's more about making these and then just painting and thinking about it like all the time.
Yeah.
It's amazing to me how I can only say how painting demands your mental attention. So much so that like you become so self-involved, but like one has to be to like maintain that personal vision. Otherwise, yeah, we do get like, thrown off or something. And I don't know. It's a sacrifice and it's also a gift. And there's like, I feel like the luckiest person in the world. But then also, it is, you have to choose to commit to your art. You do. And you have to let things go that you could have, but there's not enough time,
Another question?
What brand of paint do you use?
Oh,
If I could have the kind of paint that I want, like
we're like unlimited money.
unlimited money, yeah. I don't know. I use all different types of oil paint, and I do tend to use the like standard artist, kind of the cheaper stuff for when I, use to transfer and do a lot of my larger, broader coverings. But like, you have to buy the good stuff if you want good color. I mean, you can't make an amazing, expensive, cobalt blue. You can't make that.
Right.
You have to buy it. And so, but I also use, the cheap stuff. So a combination. Yeah. And
My favorite is Holbein because I like that buttery consistency.
it's amazing,
so
yeah.
I had some Williamsburg, but they completely dried up. Williamsburg, isn't it? It's very expensive.
It
But
is,
I love Holbein. And I've bought color just because of the names of them. Persian pink and Caesar's purple. I mean, how can you resist that,
The title of the show is Dissonance and Repair, and I heard Barbara mention repair, but maybe it's me, but I didn't hear
Dissonance.
anything about dissonance. Would you, either of you like
Well,
to
yeah.
talk about that?
It sort of came out of the way that I'm dissonant in a way, and she's more repairing. That is how it came about. I'm more interested maybe in conflict or difference within a painting where she unifies or
Yeah.
creates a harmony, and I'm more interested in creating a conflict
Like
or
clash.
a clash or things being uncomfortable. Yeah.
It's going to be a good question, Bree.
So I want you to talk more about that because in a lot of ways, at least from my perspective, death doesn't really have conflict because that's just it. You die, and then it's just it. Sorry for the morbid conversation. So So what conflict do you see with death?
I didn't see conflict with death necessarily. I mean, I've always been fascinated with death and the corporality of the body, like us living and being, and then, at times I was interested in talking about some political events that were happening and issues of war and violence. But for me, dissonance comes more in terms of formal language and material and the kind of difference that one can have within a painting in terms of visual language. But then those binaries of like control and chaos, organic versus natural, but death and life, you know, a cyclical nature, and the way that I hope my paintings could potentially be both about death and about life, like, and that you know, these words are sort of hard because they're words and sometimes way too heady, and you know, but I guess I like the idea that things would be both within a painting. They would like start to unravel and then also be built up, or so, and then yeah.
Are there any other questions? We've got time for one more. Anybody else? Well, that's it then, I guess. Thank you, Barbara and Kim, for coming today.
Thank you.